She had reported it twice. The first time, she filed a complaint with the city's Department of Buildings, and the file came back closed with a single typed line, cold as metal, inspected, no violation found. The second time, she stood in the manager's doorway and said it to his face. Gordon Pike never lifted his head from his stack of receipts. "The building has a stamped inspection certificate from March," he said. Then he added one more thing, in a voice that was almost gentle. "Sweetheart, you're a waitress." She had not finished that shift before the roof came down on 300 people. Outside, the snow had turned to freezing rain when the light went. The old woman in the silver-gray dress walked into the open stretch of floor beneath the glass dome, the space they always kept clear for photographs. Her 2 security men were looking the other way. 300 guests were looking at one another. Not one person was looking at her. She tipped her head back. Willa Doyle, standing at Station 7 with her hands folded in front of her exactly as the handbook required, tipped her head back too, and saw the thing that 5 years of carrying trays had taught her how to see. Along one of the cast-iron ribs, a dark line of water was pooling, because that rib had settled lower than the ribs on either side of it. Then the roof spoke. One small dry click, high up, like the sound of a small bone. She let the tray go. 12 glasses burst on the stone behind her. Somebody screamed. The band lost the beat in the middle of a phrase, and not one of those things slowed her by half a step. She reached the old woman without breaking, put one arm around her waist and drove them both toward the base of the marble column. And she understood how light the woman was, light as an armful of coats. Then the roof let go. It did not shatter. It opened, splitting into 2 sheets that slid down on either side, like doors swinging inward. And the first thing through was not glass. It was the storm. February off Lake Michigan poured straight down into a hall lit by 400 bulbs. 300 napkins lifted at once. Every candle went out. Wet snow came down in slabs onto the tables and onto people's shoulders, and only then the glass, exploding across the marble in a white wave that ran all the way to the far wall. And after that came the silence. 300 human beings in one room, and not one of them made a sound. In that silence, Willa heard 3 things. Her own heart beating in her throat, snow falling onto a stone floor, a sound no one in that building had ever heard indoors, and against her shoulder blade, the breathing of a 72-year-old woman, fast, shallow, but breathing. She looked up. Where the glass dome had been for 100 years, there was now only an opening, and through that opening, for the first time in the history of the building, a person could see the sky. Then, through the swirling snow, came the sound of footsteps, not hurried, not hesitant, and all 300 people moved aside to let them through. If Willa's story moved you, leave a like, share it with someone who would understand, and subscribe to our channel to walk the rest of this road with her. The man who came through the snow did not look at the ruin of the ceiling, and he did not look at the 400 people who had begun, slowly, to remember how to move. He crossed the marble in a straight line, past a table where the ice sculpture had gone over, and lay sweating in the cold, past a senator who put out a hand toward him and drew it back, and he came to the base of the column, and he went down onto both knees in the wet glass, without any regard for what that would do to the fabric of his trousers. He did not say his mother's name. He put 2 fingers against the side of her throat, the way a man does when he already knows the answer and needs the answer anyway, and he stayed like that while a drift of snow settled into the shoulders of his jacket and did not melt. Willa was close enough to see his hands. That was the thing. Everyone in the hall who was still upright was watching him, because he was the reason they had come, because his name was on the invitation, and on the wing of the hospital they had all been asked to fund, and every one of them saw what she saw from a distance of 18 inches. Which was that the hands of August Sartori were shaking. Not much. The way a wire shakes after something heavy has passed over it. He got them under control in the space of one long breath, and by the time he lifted his mother's wrist and folded her fingers around his own, they were perfectly still, and Willa understood that she had just watched a man put something away in a place he did not intend to open again in public. Rosalind Sartori's eyes came open. She looked at her son, and she said something low and irritable that Willa could not hear, and his mouth moved in a way that on another face might have been the beginning of a smile. Then he turned his head, and he looked at Willa. He did not thank her. She would think about that later, on the bus, and in the weeks after, and it would still be the strangest part. He did not say the word thank. He did not say the word grateful. He did not reach for her hand or ask her name, or do any of the things that a man is supposed to do in a story like this one. He looked at her the way a man reads a page he intends to remember, without writing anything down. He looked at the cut running down the inside of her left forearm, from the elbow toward the wrist, where the cast iron had opened her sleeve and the skin under it, and he looked at the name tag pinned crooked over her heart, and he looked at her face, and it took perhaps 4 seconds, and it felt to her like standing in an open doorway in January. Behind him, 2 of his men had reached the column. One of them was already talking into his sleeve. The other crouched to take the old woman's weight, and August said one word, very quietly, and the man stopped where he was and did not touch her. Then August Sartori did a thing that no one in the room misunderstood except the woman it was done to. He stood, and he took off his overcoat, black wool, still carrying the cold of the street underneath the snow on its shoulders, and he laid it across Willa Doyle's back and drew the front of it closed over her ruined uniform with both hands, the way a father does at the end of a long night. Nobody moved. The band had not touched their instruments since the ceiling opened. 400 people in evening clothes stood in the wreckage of a room, and every single one of them watched a waitress being wrapped in the coat of the most careful man in Chicago, and the only person in the hall who did not know what she was looking at was Willa. All she felt was that it was warm, and that it was heavy, and that it smelled of cedar and of winter, and that for the first time since the roof spoke she was not shaking. He put his hand under her elbow, not gripping it, just there. "You walk with me," he said. "From here to the doors, you walk with me." And they went, the 2 of them and the men carrying his mother behind, and 400 people opened a path down the length of the hall, as though someone had drawn it on the floor in chalk, and not one of them said a word to her, and not one of them looked away. The clinic was on the 2nd floor of a building on Wabash, with no sign on the door, and a waiting room that held 4 chairs and no magazines. And the woman who stitched her arm did not ask how it had happened, did not ask for identification, did not write anything down that Willa could see. 7 stitches, from below the elbow toward the wrist, laid in with a patience that suggested she had done this before, and would do it again before the week was out. When it was finished, she taped a dressing over the whole length of it, and said to keep it dry. And that was the entire conversation. Nobody asked Willa to sign anything. Nobody asked her to pay. She walked out into a street where the freezing rain had stopped, and the salt trucks were already grinding past, still wearing a black wool overcoat that came down past her knees, carrying her own coat over her good arm because the sleeve of it was ruined. She rode the red line home with the collar turned up and her hands in the pockets, and she found in the left pocket a book of matches from a restaurant she had never heard of, and she put it back. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor of a walk-up in Bridgeport, with a radiator that knocked all night, and Toby had left the kitchen light on for her the way he always did, and his sketchbook was open on the table to a page of engine cowlings drawn in pencil, so soft it smudged when she moved it. She did not wake him. She sat down at the table in the coat, and she stayed there while the window went from black to gray. And at some point in that gray, her phone buzzed against the wood. It was Gordon Pike. He had written it the way a man writes when he has been told what to write. Suspended pending review. Conduct causing alarm among guests. He did not ask about her arm. She read it 3 times and set the phone face down and understood, with a clarity that surprised her, that she was not going to cry about it, because crying was a thing you did when something had gone wrong, and nothing had gone wrong. Everything had gone exactly the way it was built to go. The car came before 9. She did not hear it pull up. She heard the buzzer, and then a voice on the intercom that said only that Mr. Sartori would appreciate a few minutes of her time, and when she came down the stairs, there was a black sedan at the curb, with a man standing beside the rear door, and the engine running, and she got in because she was too tired to think of a reason not to. August Sartori was in the far corner of the back seat, with a folder unopened on his knee. He looked as though he had not slept, and had no intention of admitting it. He did not ask how her arm was. He said his mother had been kept overnight for observation, and was already refusing the food, and then he opened the folder, and took out a check, and pushed it across the leather toward her with 2 fingers, and Willa looked down at the number written on it, and felt the whole night arrive at once, and she picked it up and pushed it back. "Did you just put a price on your mother?" she said. He did not move. Something happened behind his face that she would not be able to name for months. "There is something I want," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she expected. "And it is not that. There are 11 other rooms in that building with old iron over them, and there are 2 more buildings on that block with the same architect and the same year. I want every anchor point pulled and inspected by somebody who does not work for whoever signed that certificate in March. All of them. Written up, not filed away. The car was quiet. Outside, a woman went by pushing a cart with a plastic sheet over it. He was looking at her the way he had looked at her under the column, reading a page he did not intend to write down. And when he finally spoke, his voice had changed by some small degree she could not measure. "You are asking me for something that does you no good at all," he said. "No," she said. "I am asking you for the only thing worth having." The room on the 4th floor of the house on Astor Street had been paneled in cedar by his grandfather, who had been a bootlegger and had liked the smell of it, and in more than 40 years nobody had thought to change it, so that every man who sat down at that table sat down inside the same weather, warm and dry and faintly sweet, like the inside of a cigar box. There were 6 of them at the table that morning, and August Sartori sat at the end of it, with his back to the window and a glass of water in front of him that he did not touch. Outside, the city was doing what it did in February, which was to go about its business under a sky the color of dishwater, and somewhere south of the river, his grandfather's name was still on the cornerstone of a warehouse that now held nothing but rolls of carpet. The organization the old man had left behind had been 3 things when August took it, and it was 3 things still: a construction company that poured foundations for half the north side, 2 locals whose pension boards had never once voted against a Sartori recommendation, and a room in Indiana with a state license and a very forgiving accountant. What they were arguing about now was 11 acres on the river, where a developer wanted to put 4 towers, and Ray Halloran had been running the acquisition, and Ray Halloran had made a private arrangement with a title company that everyone at the table already knew about, including Ray Halloran, who kept talking anyway. August listened. He did not take notes. He never took notes. The men who had come up under his father had learned to read the absence of a pen as a kind of weather report. Halloran got to the end of his explanation and stopped, and the room went on being quiet for a while, and someone at the far end shifted in his chair and then thought better of shifting again. August turned the water glass 1/4 turn on the table. "Ray," he said, "I think next week you should stay home." That was all of it. He did not raise his voice. He did not say the word out. He did not use a verb that anyone in that room could have repeated to a grand jury, and every man there understood exactly what had happened, including Halloran, who sat very still for the length of 2 breaths, and then stood up and buttoned his jacket and said "Thank you." August, in a voice that came out almost normal, and walked to the door and opened it himself and closed it behind him with care. Nobody looked at the door. Desmond Kerrigan, who had sat at that table since before August could see over it, spread his hands in a small gesture of regret for a man he had eaten dinner with 100 times, and said something about the title company that made 2 of the others laugh. And the meeting went on to the question of the pension board, and August let them talk. He was not listening anymore. There was a folder on the cedar in front of him, and he had not opened it during the meeting, and he opened it now, under the table's edge. The way a man checks a watch, he does not want anyone to see him check. It held a single sheet, a photocopy, slightly gray at one edge where the machine had caught the seam of a bound book. It was a page from a service log, the kind kept behind a hostess stand and initialed at the end of every shift. And near the bottom of it, in a hand that was small and square and unhurried, somebody had written 4 lines: location, condition, duration, a request for inspection of the anchor points. No adjectives. Nothing about how frightening it was. Nothing about whose fault it was. Nothing that asked anybody to feel anything at all. It was dated 9 days before the roof came down. He had been looking at it since a little after 4 that morning. He had not asked anyone in the room where it came from, and no one in the room had asked him what it was. And when the others finally stood and gathered their coats, he closed the folder without hurrying and put his hand flat on top of it, and stayed that way, alone in the cedar, long after the door had shut. She still had the key to the service door on Clark, because nobody had asked her for it, and because a suspension is not a firing, and she let herself in through the kitchen on the 3rd night after, when the city had put orange plastic fencing across the front of the building, and hung a notice on the glass that said the premises were closed, pending structural assessment. She had not come for paper. Paper was upstairs in the office, and paper could be pulled and reprinted and signed by anybody with a stamp, and she had already learned what a stamp was worth. She had come because she was the only person who would walk into that hall and know what to look at, and because a thing she had learned from a man who was dead was that you do not get to check twice. The kitchen was warm, which surprised her. They had left the heat on to keep the pipes from splitting. She went through the swinging door into the service corridor with her shoes in her hand and stopped there for a long moment, breathing, letting her eyes take what light there was. and then she stepped out into the hall. It was open to the sky. That was the thing she was not prepared for, though she had known it, and the cold came down through the hole where the dome had been and stood in the room like a person. The tables were still there under a skin of ice. Somebody had walked a path through the debris and salted it. Above her, the 4 ribs that had held the glass ended in nothing, and at the base of each of them was the iron seat that took the load into the wall, and the western one was the one she wanted, and she was halfway across the floor toward it when she saw the light. It came from a work lamp, clamped to a scaffold tower against the west wall, and it was pointed away from her, and there were 3 men up on the platform of it, with their backs to the hall, and she went down behind the bar so fast that her bandaged arm took the whole weight of her on the terrazzo, and she had to put her wrist in her mouth. She lay there and listened. A ratchet, 5 clicks. A pause, 5 clicks more. A man saying something about the torque, and another one telling him it did not matter what the torque was. And then a sound she recognized before she understood it. The flat, ringing knock of cast iron being set down on a moving blanket. Careful. The way you set down something you do not want to mark. She got up onto her elbows behind the bar rail and looked through the gap under the shelf where the wine glasses hung. They had the old anchor cup off the wall. One of them was holding it under the work lamp and turning it, and even from 40 feet away in bad light, she could see the crack in it. A bright, irregular seam running down through the boss where the rod passed, the metal shining along the fracture, the way metal only shines when it has been open for a while and has kept moving. And on the blanket at their feet was a second one, the same casting, the same era, the same paint, and it was whole. She understood the whole shape of it in less than a breath. The assessment would come, and an engineer would climb that scaffold with a clipboard, and he would find at the western anchor a 100-year-old iron seat in sound condition, and he would write that the fastenings had held, and that the load on the glass had exceeded design, and the words for what happened would be weather and act of God. And the certificate signed in March would never be looked at again by anybody. Her phone was in her coat pocket. She got it out with her left hand and turned the brightness all the way down against her stomach before she raised it, and she braced her forearms on the shelf because her hands would not stay still, and she waited until the man under the lamp turned the cracked cup so the fracture faced the light. She took 11 pictures. She took them with the volume off and the flash off and the scaffold and the west wall in frame, so that anyone looking at them later would know where in the world they had been taken, and then she put the phone against her chest and lay flat on the floor behind the bar, with her cheek on the cold stone, while the ratchet started again. It went on a long time. She heard the new cup go up, and the sound of it seating, and somebody laughing at something, and a broom. When the lamp finally went off, and the men came down, and their footsteps went out through the front toward the loading door on Hubbard, she stayed exactly where she was for a very long while, listening to snow coming down through the open roof onto the tables, and thinking, with a calm that frightened her more than the men had, that she was now the only person alive who had seen the thing that killed that ceiling, and that nobody on earth knew it except her. Sully's was on Halsted under the viaduct, and it had been there since before anyone working in it now was born, and Nadine Prosser had given Willa the overnight countershift when nobody else in the city would put her on a schedule, and asked exactly one question about it, which was whether she could carry a full tray with a bad arm, and when Willa said she could carry it with either arm, Nadine said fine, and went back to the fryer. So it was Willa who was refilling the sugar caddies near the end of a Tuesday, when the bell over the door went, and August Sartori came in out of the cold, and sat down in the corner booth with his back to the wall. He asked for a glass of water. She brought it, and he thanked her, and set it down 2 inches from his right hand, and did not touch it again for as long as he sat there. He did not mention the check. He did not mention his mother, or the notice on the door of the restaurant, or the fact that she was standing in a diner on Halsted at 11 at night, wearing an apron with somebody else's name stitched on it, and she had braced herself for all 3, and found she had nothing to brace against. What he said, after a while, was that he wanted to know what she had meant to be. She laughed at him. It came out before she could stop it. A short, unlovely sound, and he waded through it without any change of expression, and so eventually she told him. 2 years of structural engineering at a state school on the west side. A 3rd semester she had walked out of in October because her mother was sick, and there was no version of the arithmetic in which she could sit in a lecture hall and also cover what the hospital wanted covered. She had liked the load courses best, she said, which surprised people. Everyone assumed she would like the drawing. She had liked the part where you learned that every building standing anywhere is an argument between weight and the things holding weight up, and that the argument never ends, and that most of the time nobody wins it, they only postpone it. He listened the way he had listened to the men in the cedar room, which is to say completely and without any encouragement at all, and when she finished, he took a pen out of his inside pocket and slid it across the table with a paper coaster under it. "Show me," he said. "Show me how it failed." So she drew it. She drew the 4 ribs, and the way they came down to the seats, and the way the seats took the thrust out into the masonry, and she drew the western one lower than the other 3, and she drew the pond of water that a low rib makes, and she drew the weight of it, and she wrote the numbers along the margin in her small square hand, and he watched her do it and asked her twice to go back, and neither time was the question stupid. Then he put a hand flat on the coaster for a second, and stood, and put on his coat, and said goodnight to her, and went out. It was only after the door shut behind him that she looked up and understood what she was looking at. The counter was empty. The booths were empty. The 2 men who had been eating pie at the far end when he arrived were gone, and the man who came in every night at 10 for a patty melt was not there, and the register showed no sales in over an hour, and through the window, parked across from the viaduct, with its engine running and its lights off, was a black sedan with 2 men sitting in it. She stood in the middle of a diner that a man had quietly emptied so that he could ask her a question, and she felt the warmth go out of the whole evening at once, the way a room changes when someone opens a door somewhere else in the house. She was still standing there when the bell went a second time. The woman who came in was wearing a good wool coat and driving gloves, and a silk scarf tied the way women of a certain generation tie them, and she was walking with a cane she clearly resented, and she got herself onto a counter stool with the deliberation of somebody who has decided in advance not to accept any help. "Do you have pie?" Rosalind Sartori said. "You have apple," Willa said. "I know you have apple. I can see it from here. I was being polite. Warm it up, and if there is ice cream, I will have that too, and do not tell my son." Willa put the plate down in front of her, and Rosalind picked up her fork and looked at it and said, "Byrne drove me, my driver. He has a boy who has wanted to see the Blackhawks since he was old enough to hold a stick, and I have had 2 tickets in my purse since Christmas doing absolutely nothing, and this evening we came to an understanding." She ate 2 bites. "You are wondering how I found this place?" "I was, yes. August was here. Therefore I was going to be here. It is not complicated. It only looks complicated." She glanced up, and her eyes were her son's eyes exactly, and there was nothing at all soft in them. "Has he lied to you yet?" "I don't think so. You will know when he does. He gets polite. Everyone else in the world gets careless when they lie. My son gets courteous, and it has taken me 30 years to teach anyone that, and nobody believes me until they see it." She went back to the pie. "Sit down, please. I have been talked around for 1 entire week by doctors, and I would like very much to be talked to." The envelope came on a Thursday, and she almost threw it out, because she knew the shape of it the way a person knows the shape of a hand raised in a doorway, and she had been getting that envelope every month for 4 years, and had learned to open it standing over the trash. The letter inside was 1 page. It thanked her for her attention to the account. It said the balance in the amount of $61,040 had been satisfied in full by a third party, that no further payments were required, and that the account had been closed. There was a line at the bottom for questions and a number that would go to a call center in Arizona. She read it twice and put it flat on the kitchen table and stood with both hands on the back of a chair for a while. Then she got her coat. The house on Astor Street had a stone face and a door that a man opened before she had touched the bell, and she was left in the front hall for perhaps 2 minutes, with her boots dripping onto a rug that was probably older than the building she lived in, and when she was brought upstairs, the door to the cedar room was standing open, and August Sartori was on the telephone with his back half turned. He held up one hand, not to stop her, only to ask for the time it would take him to finish a sentence, and she stood in the doorway and looked at the table. And on the table was a folder, and the folder was open. She could read upside down. Everyone who has ever waited tables can read upside down. The top sheet was a copy of a death certificate for Owen Doyle, cause of death listed in the flat language such things use, dated 15 years ago in November. Under it was a registrar's withdrawal form from a state university, with her own signature on it, in handwriting she barely recognized as hers. Under that was a statement of account from a hospital on the north side, with a figure at the bottom that she had carried in her body for 4 years the way other people carry a bad knee. He put the phone down. "You gave it to them without asking me. she said. I did. You looked into my father. I looked into everything. Before Sully's. Before you ever sat down in that booth. You knew what my mother died of, and what it cost, and what I quit, and when I quit it. And then you came and asked me what I had meant to be, and you let me sit there and tell you. He did not deny it. That was the part she could not get past afterward, that he did not even reach for a softer word. Yes, he said. You made me tell you a story you had already read. I wanted to hear how you told it. She laughed then, and it was not a good sound, and it startled her more than it startled him. Do you know what you have done? She said. I have removed a debt. You have bought one. He came around the end of the table, not fast. Say that again? I said you bought one, she said, and her voice was climbing and she let it climb. That money is gone. It cannot be sent back. There is no account to send it to. The file is closed. I checked in the car on the way here. So for the rest of my life, every single time I do something you want done, I get to wonder, was that right? Or was that the 61,000 talking? You have taken the one thing I still owned outright, which was knowing why I did what I did, and you paid it off and closed the account. You are angry that I helped you. I am angry that I will never be sure again. That landed. She saw it land, in the small stillness that went through him, and it did not make her feel better. Nobody asked me, she said, quieter. That is the whole of it. You did not ask. Your mother bribed a man with 2 hockey tickets so she could sit at a counter and be talked to like a person, and you emptied a diner so nobody would look at you, and neither of you has ever once in your lives had to find out what it feels like when somebody decides a thing about you and then tells you afterward. He said her name. It was the first time he had used it out loud, and it did not help him. She looked past him at the folder on the cedar. Close that, she said. I am not a page. She went home on the bus with her hands in her lap and she did not cry. And in the morning she wrote to the operations office of Aurelia and resigned her position. 3 lines, no adjectives, effective immediately, and she signed it with the same small square hand she had used in the service log. And when it was sent, she sat at the kitchen table in the gray light and felt the strangest thing she had ever felt, which was that she had just given up the only job in the city that would have her, over a debt that had already been forgiven, and that she would do it again, and that she would never afterward be able to prove to herself, not once, not fully, that she had done it for the right reason. It took her 4 days, and it cost $11, and she did it from a public terminal on the 2nd floor of a branch library on Archer, because she did not want it done on any machine that belonged to her. The permit history for the building was open to anybody who knew where to look, and she knew, because a man who had spent 22 years on iron had once explained to a 12-year-old at a kitchen table that everything that happens to a building gets written down somewhere, and the trick is that nobody ever reads it. The certificate from March was scanned in as a PDF, and there was the stamp, and there was the signature of a licensed inspector she had never heard of, and there at the top was the name of the firm that had issued it, Lakeview Structural Assessment Group, an address on the northwest side, a license number in good standing. She wrote it down. The state business registry took another hour, and it did not give up anything on the first pass, because Lakeview Structural Assessment Group was a limited liability company whose sole member was another limited liability company, and that one had a registered agent in Delaware, and an address that turned out to be a mail drop above a currency exchange, and she went around that circle twice before she thought to search the officer's name instead of the company's. And there it was, not hidden, not even particularly buried, filed with the state in plain view, the way things are filed by people who have never in their lives expected anyone to look. Manager, Desmond J. Kerrigan. Parent entity, Sartori Holdings, Incorporated. She sat in a plastic chair in a public library with her coat still on and looked at the screen for a long time without any thought in her head at all. And then the thoughts arrived, and they arrived in the wrong order, the way they do. The first one was small and almost funny. She had been suspended for causing alarm by a manager who was covered by a certificate issued by a company owned by the man who had wrapped her in his coat. The second one was not funny. The dust she had watched for 9 nights, the rib that settled, the water that pooled, all of it went back to a stamp, and the stamp had been sold, and the money for it had gone into the same account that had quietly closed out a hospital debt on the north side. And the third one came slowly, and it made her put her hand flat on the desk. The old woman in the silver-gray dress. The old woman with her son's eyes who wanted her pie warmed and did not want him told. That ceiling had come down on Rosalind Sartori, because of a piece of paper her own son's organization had sold. And August did not know it, or he did know it, and Willa could not tell which of those two things she was looking at, and both of them were unbearable in different ways. She logged out and cleared the session and walked to the bus in the cold. And by the time she got home, she had done the other arithmetic. The arithmetic that mattered. And it had come out ugly. She had 11 photographs on a phone. The object in those photographs no longer existed anywhere on Earth. It had gone out the loading door on Hubbard on a moving blanket, and by now it was scrap in a yard in Cicero, or at the bottom of a canal. And a whole and sound casting of the same age and the same paint was bolted to the wall in its place, waiting for an engineer with a clipboard. She had a page from a service log, and the original of that log sat in an office, inside a building she no longer had legal reason to enter. She had a complaint she had filed herself with the City Bureau of Building Inspection, and that complaint had already been reviewed and closed, and the document that closed it was the certificate. Everything she had was a claim. Everything they had was a record. A woman with no job, no license standing, no engineering degree, a grievance against the restaurant that suspended her, and 11 photographs she could not prove were taken on the night she said they were. Walking into a state's attorney's office to accuse a company that had never had so much as a lien filed against it. She could see the meeting. She could see the young lawyer being kind to her, and so she sat on the edge of her bed with her coat on and made herself say it out loud in the empty apartment, because saying it out loud was the only way she knew to keep from lying to herself later, that she was not going to be able to do this from the outside, that the only documents in the world that could stand up were the ones kept inside that house on Astor Street, and that she was going to have to stay close to the man who owned them. It was Rosalind who arranged it, in the way that Rosalind arranged everything, which was to announce it as a thing that had already been decided. She wanted to see the museum in Hyde Park, because she had not been since Nixon, she said, and she wanted company that would not hover, and Willa should bring the brother she never stopped talking about. So on a Saturday morning, the four of them stood under the belly of a great silver airplane, hung on wires from the ceiling of the transportation gallery, and Toby Doyle, who was 14 and had opinions, took one look at the man in the dark overcoat standing beside his sister, and decided that here at last was somebody who had not yet heard any of them. He started with the engines. He explained that everybody thinks a jet engine pushes the plane forward by blowing air out the back, and that this is basically wrong, or at least it is the least interesting way to say it, and that what actually happens is that the fan out front moves an enormous amount of air around the outside of the core, and that on the big ones, something like 85% of the thrust never even goes through the burning part at all, and that this is called bypass, and it is the reason modern planes are quiet enough to sleep on. He said all of this at a volume that made a docent look over. August Sartori put his hands behind his back and listened to him with exactly the same attention he had given 6 men in a cedar room, and then he asked what the fan blades were made of, and Toby said titanium, mostly, and hollow, and then had to admit he was not completely sure how they made them hollow. And August said that seemed like a thing worth finding out, and Toby said he would, and wrote it on his hand. Rosalind bought caramel corn from a cart by the entrance to the coal mine, an enormous striped tub of it, and refused all offers of help carrying it, and then sat on a bench underneath the airplane and held the tub in her lap and dispensed it like a woman rationing something during a war. Toby asked her if she had ever flown in a propeller plane, and she said she had, twice, and that the second time the pilot had been drinking, and Toby laughed so hard he had to sit down on the floor. Willa stood a little apart and watched her brother explain compressor stalls to a man who owned 2 labor unions, and watched that man ask an actual question about it, and watched an old woman in a good coat steal caramel corn out of her own tub while pretending not to, and she felt something in her chest that she had no name for, and did not entirely want. On the way out, Toby stopped in front of a case of scale models, and stood there long enough that everyone else stopped too, and he said, not really to anybody, that he was going to do the ground school as soon as he turned 16, and that you could get most of the way to a license before you were old enough to drive somebody else's car. And Rosalind said that was the first sensible ambition she had heard from anyone in 11 years. They dropped him at a friend's house on the way back, and he went up the walk with his hand still ink-stained, and the last of the caramel corn under his arm. It was late afternoon when Willa got home. She saw the door before she reached the landing, the way it stood a half-inch out of the frame with a bright, fresh scar in the wood by the strike plate, and she stood on the 3rd floor of a walk-up in Bridgeport for a while with her keys in her hand, and did not go in until she had made herself breathe. Nothing was broken. That was the message, and she understood the message perfectly. The television was still there. The jar of quarters on the shelf was still there. Her laptop was on the table where she had left it, closed, and beside it was a rectangle of clean dust where an external drive had been that morning, and the drawer of the side table stood open, and the old phone she had kept in it, the one with a cracked screen and 11 photographs on it, was gone. She sat down on the arm of the couch in her coat. Then she took out the phone in her pocket and opened the cloud folder she had made in a library on Archer 4 days earlier, and scrolled. And there they were, all 11, time-stamped and untouched. And she looked at them for a long moment in the dark apartment before she said out loud, to nobody, that they had been very quiet about it, and that she was going to have to be quieter. The dedication was held in the new atrium of the children's wing on a Thursday evening, and Willa went because Rosalind had asked her to, and because Willa had made a decision in a library on Archer that required her to be in rooms like this one. She borrowed a dress from Nadine's daughter, navy, a little long in the sleeve, which was fortunate, and she stood near the back through the speeches, and looked at the plaque with the family name cut into it, and thought about the arithmetic that puts a name on a wall. Afterward, there were small plates of food that nobody ate, and a string quartet playing at a volume designed to be talked over, and she went to find her coat, and the coat check was down a corridor away from the noise, and that was where Sabine Marchetti was waiting for her. Willa had seen her earlier, at the front, near the family. She was perhaps 32, in a dress the color of wet slate, and she had the kind of composure that comes from never once in your life having been asked to leave a room. "Willa Doyle," she said, and put out her hand, and her handshake was warm. "I have wanted to meet you. I am Sabine. Desmond is my godfather. August and I grew up in the same 11 houses." She had a low, pleasant voice, and she used it the way a good nurse uses a needle. "May I tell you something honest? It will sound unkind, and it is not meant unkindly." She stepped in slightly, out of the traffic of the corridor, and as she did, she put her hand on Willa's left forearm, and her fingers came to rest, without any hesitation at all, directly on the seam of the healing scar under the borrowed sleeve, and stayed there. "What you did in that hall was the finest thing anyone in this family has been given in 30 years, Sabine said. "I want you to hear me say that first, because everything after it is going to be harder. Gratitude is real, Willa. It is also a living thing, and living things have a lifespan, and I think you should know what the lifespan of this one is. It is exactly as long as Rosalind's. That is not cruelty, it is arithmetic, and I have watched this family do arithmetic my entire life. When she goes, and she is 72 and her heart is not good, what will be left in that room is a man who is very tired, and a great many people who need him to make sense." Her hand did not move on the scar. "You have been in the house. You have seen the table. Do you know what happens to a man in his position when the woman at his side flinches at the wrong moment? Not screams. Flinches. Someone puts a hand out to be shaken, and she looks at what the hand has done. Somebody's wife asks her where she summers. It is not one large humiliation. It is 400 small ones a year. And he will see every one of them, and every one of them will cost him something. And the terrible part, the part I would not wish on you, is that he will never say a word about it. He is the most courteous man alive when he is trying to spare somebody." She let that sit for one beat. "Do not make him choose. That is all I came to say. Because he will choose, and he will choose beautifully, and he will be kind to you for the rest of his life, and you will still be the woman he chose, and everyone in every room will know it, and you will feel it every single day until you stop being able to feel anything at all." Down the corridor, the quartet finished something, and there was that flat little patter of applause. Sabine took her hand off Willa's arm and smoothed the sleeve back down over it, gently, the way you would straighten a child's collar. "I am only saying it because I care about what happens to you," she said. "Nobody else in that room will." Then she smiled, and it was not a cruel smile. That was the worst of it, and she went back toward the light and the music. Willa stood in the corridor holding a coat check ticket. She had spent 5 years being spoken to by people who did not see her, and she had an answer for every one of them, filed and ready. And she stood there now with her mouth slightly open and nothing in it at all, and the place on her arm where the woman's fingers had been stayed warm for a long time afterward, which was somehow the thing she could not forgive. Rosalind found her before she found her coat. She came down the corridor with the cane she resented, and she did not ask what Sabine had said, which told Willa that she had seen them, and she said only that she wanted air, and that the atrium was full of people telling her how brave she was. They went out through a side door onto a terrace where the salt crunched underfoot, and the wind came around the corner of the building in gusts. And Rosalind put her back against the brick where it was sheltered, and looked out at the parking structure and said, "You have not once asked me what I was doing." Willa said she had assumed the old woman had gotten away from her escort. "Yes," Rosalind said. "I did. I got away from them the way I have gotten away from them 11 or 12 times since October. And I am going to tell you how, because I would like exactly one person in the world to know that I am not a lost dog." She said it without heat. She said the trick was that men who guard people watch for someone trying to leave, and that nobody watches an old woman moving toward the middle of a room. She said she had learned that if you carry a glass, you can stand anywhere for 4 minutes, and no one will approach you. She said she had learned that the best moment is not when the music is loud, but when a photographer is setting up, because every person in the room turns toward the camera at once, including the men who are paid not to. Willa listened to a 72-year-old woman describe counter-surveillance in the tone another woman might use for a bridge hand. "Why," she said. Rosalind was quiet for a moment. Then she said that in August of the previous year, she had gone into the basement of the house on Astor Street, looking for a box of her husband's letters, and had found instead 11 cartons of files that should not have been in a house at all. Job files, bid sheets, correspondence from the 1980s and 90s, from before, from the buildings her husband had put up all over this city. She said she had opened one carton to be nosy, and had gone on opening them for 4 months. "I have been a decoration for a very long time," she said, "and decorations are permitted to be in the room while people talk. Do you understand what that means? It means I know the names of every firm that has ever certified anything for us, and I did not know that I knew until I started reading." She said that what she had begun to see, slowly, the way you see a face in a wallpaper pattern, was a habit. Not one crime. A habit. The same 3 or 4 firms, over and over, on the jobs where the specification called for something expensive. And she said that she had started, then, to go and look at the buildings themselves, because paper is only paper. The bank on La Salle, the parish hall on Ashland, the lobby of the building on Wacker with the terrible fountain. I have stood in all of them since Thanksgiving, and looked up at things, and had no idea what I was looking at, because I am a woman who reads Trollope, not engineering. She turned her head and looked at Willa directly. "That is why I was there. That is why I was standing in the middle of that floor. That building was one of my husband's, and it had been recertified last March, and I wanted to see the glass with my own eyes." The wind came around the corner and took the end of her scarf, and she put it down again without seeming to notice. Willa found that her hands had gone cold in a way that had nothing to do with the terrace. Every image she had carried out of that night rearranged itself while she stood there. The woman she had thought was drifting had walked out into that open floor on purpose, in a room she had chosen, on a night she had chosen, to look at a ceiling she had come specifically to look at. "You were investigating," Willa said. "I was being nosy," Rosalind said. "There is a difference, and I have not decided yet which one I am." Then she added, in a lower voice, "I had been standing there perhaps 10 seconds. I had just gotten my head back, and I was thinking that I could not see anything wrong at all, and that I was a foolish old woman, and that I would go home." She let that sit, and then somebody who could see it came across that room and put me on the floor. What Rosalind had said about the same firms turning up on the same kind of job stayed with Willa for 3 days, and on the 4th, she borrowed Nadine's car and drove up to Milwaukee, because the old paper records for Ironworkers Local 118 had been moved out of the hall on Fullerton years ago and put in a storage facility off the interstate near the airport, and because her father had been a member of that local for 22 years and she had never once in her life asked to see his file. The archive was 2 rooms in a converted warehouse with a laminate counter and a young man named Petey, who was very glad to have something to do. She told him she was Owen Doyle's daughter. He looked her up and said her father's card was still in the system, dues paid through the month he died, and did she want the membership record or the whole box? She said the whole box. It came out on a cart. It was a banker's box with his name and marker on the end in somebody else's handwriting, and it held the things a working life leaves behind: apprenticeship papers from when he was 19, a certification for rigging, a form about a shoulder he hurt in the 90s, a photograph of a raising gang on a beam 40 stories up over the river, with 11 men on it, and her father, 3rd from the left, with his hard hat pushed back, grinning at whoever held the camera. She sat with that photograph a while. Then, near the bottom, in a folder marked with a job number and a year, she found a form, It was a safety condition report, the union's own, 1 page, carbons long since separated. The building address at the top was a number on Clark Street that she had walked past 6 days a week for 5 years. The job was described as a restoration and reglazing of an original barrel dome, 1924 construction, and it was dated 15 years ago in June. And in the box for the condition observed, in handwriting that was small and square and unhurried, a man had written 4 lines: location, condition, duration, a request for inspection of the anchor points. No adjectives. Nothing about how frightening it was. Nothing that asked anybody to feel anything at all. At the bottom of the form, there was a line for the business agent's disposition, and somebody had written across it in blue ink, "No basis found, no further action," and initialed it, and then signed underneath in a hand that Willa had seen 4 days earlier on a state incorporation filing, Desmond J. Kerrigan. She put the paper down on the laminate counter and put both hands flat on either side of it. She remembered, and she let herself remember, because she had spent 15 years not doing it. The truck in the summer of that year. Her father eating a sandwich out of wax paper with the window down, 38 years old, telling a 12-year-old that concrete does not sweat, that it only gives off dust when something above it is pulling. She remembered that he stopped taking her to jobs after that summer. She remembered the fall, when he was home on weekdays and would not say why, and her mother on the phone in the kitchen with her hand over her mouth, and the word blacklist, which Willa did not know then and did not ask about. She remembered him going back out finally to work that he never described. Small outfits, cash, no local, no ticket, no inspection on anything. 2 years of it, and then the November when he did not come home. She had been told her whole life that her father died in an accident, and she had believed it the way you believe weather. She stood in a storage room off the interstate and understood that he had not died in an accident. He had died in a consequence. He had looked up at a ceiling and written down what he saw in 4 lines, and a man had put 4 words across the bottom of the page, and everything after that had simply been the arithmetic working itself out. And then she thought of the thing that put her down onto the plastic chair by the counter. That dome had been over her head. For 5 years she had stood at Station 7 under her father's warning, folding napkins, carrying trays, being called sweetheart, in a room he had tried to close. She had come to work in the building that killed him, every night, for 5 years, and never known. Petey asked if she was all right, and she said yes, and asked for the copier. She made 1 copy of the form. Then she took her phone out and opened the photograph of the service log page that she had kept since the beginning, the 4 lines she had written herself 9 days before the roof came down, and she set the phone on the counter next to the 15-year-old carbon and looked at the 2 of them lying side by side. The same form, in a way. The same 4 lines. The same absence of any adjective. The same handwriting, almost exactly, small and square and unhurried, because a girl learns to write from somebody. Warned and buried, warned and buried, and then the ceiling, at last, doing the only thing it had ever been going to do. She put her hand over the older page, the way you would put your hand over someone's hand, and she said, out loud, in a storage room in Milwaukee, "They told me the same thing they told you, Dad." She drove back from Milwaukee with the copy in an envelope on the passenger seat, and she did not go home. She went to Astor Street, because there was a name written across the bottom of that form in blue ink, and that name sat at a table on the 4th floor of that house, and because she had spent 4 days telling herself she would be careful, and had used all 4 of them up. The man at the door knew her by now. He said Mr. Sartori was upstairs, and asked her to wait in the hall outside the cedar room. And she stood on the runner in the 4th floor corridor, with her coat over her arm and the envelope in her hand, and she was still standing there when the door opened. It was Gordon Pike who came out. She had not seen him since a doorway, and a stack of receipts, and a word he had used almost gently. And she had thought about him more in the last month than she had in 5 years. And here he was in a corridor on Astor Street, in a cheap gray suit, and his right hand was in a fiberglass cast from the knuckles to the middle of his forearm, and it was so new that the edge of it was still bright white. He came out of that room and closed the door behind him with his left hand, carefully, the way you close a door in a hospital. Then he looked up and saw her. He stopped, and Willa watched a man she had disliked for 5 years put his eyes on the carpet and keep them there, and go past her along the runner, without a word, close enough that she could hear him breathing through his mouth, and reach the stairs and take them down. She stood absolutely still. She had wanted something to happen to Gordon Pike. She was honest enough with herself, standing in that corridor, to admit that she had wanted it in a specific and detailed way, on the bus, at 3 a.m, for a month. And now it had happened, and the whole inside of her had gone cold and flat. And the thought that arrived was not justice, and was not satisfaction. It was very simple, and it did not go away for a long time afterward. It was, I did that. Not because she had asked. She had never asked. That was somehow worse, because it meant that she was no longer a person who made requests. She was a condition in a room, a thing that was known about, and things that were known about get acted on. She had gone into that house asking for anchor points to be inspected, and a man had left it with a cast on his hand. And every single thing she wanted from now until the end of this would come out of that same door. The door was not fully shut. Pike had pulled it too, and it had come off the latch, an inch, no more. And through that inch came the sound of the cedar room, which was 2 men talking quietly, and she should have gone down the stairs after Pike, and she did not. She heard Desmond Kerrigan say that the boy had been handled and would not be a problem, and that it was regrettable, and he took no pleasure in it. She heard him say that the assessment was coming back clean, that it would say the loading exceeded design, that there was not a lawyer in this city who could make anything of a February like that one. And then she heard him say the other thing. And he said it in the voice of a man explaining something patient and old and obvious to someone who has been away. Augie, listen to me. A building is not a person. That is the first thing your father ever taught me, and he was right about it, and it has kept every one of us out of a courtroom for 30 years. A building is money. That is all it is. It is money standing up, and in 30 years of doing it exactly this way, on how many jobs, and nobody has ever gotten hurt. Nobody. Not once. There was a silence in that room that went on long enough that Willa could hear a radiator somewhere below her. When August answered, he did not raise his voice at all. He spoke slowly, the way a man speaks when he is picking every word up first, to see how much it weighs. That roof, he said, came down on my mother. Kerrigan started to say something. No, August said. You will let me finish, because I am saying it out loud for the first time, and I would like to hear how it sounds. It came down on my mother. She was standing under it, and it came down, and the only reason I am not burying her is that a waitress on $6 an hour looked up when nobody else in that room did. Another silence. For 30 years, he said. I have been told that this is a thing we do to buildings. And I have believed it, and I have signed for it. And it is not true. It has never been true. There has never been one single time in the history of this family that we did it to a building. She stood in the corridor with her father's 4 lines in an envelope in her hand, and could not move. And inside the room, August Sartori said, very quietly, we have been doing it to whoever is standing underneath. She went down the stairs and out of that house without waiting to be seen, and she did not go back. And she did not answer the car when it came to the curb on Wednesday. And after that, the car stopped coming. What came instead came through the mail and through other people, and it took her a while to understand that it was coming at all, because it did not look like anything. The first letter was from the county, and it was 2 paragraphs long, and it advised her that her food handler certification had been placed under administrative review following a complaint, that the review had no fixed timeline, and that she was not to work in a licensed establishment while it was pending. It did not say who had complained. It did not say what about. She called the number on the letter 4 times over 3 days, and was transferred to a voicemail box that was full. Then there were the restaurants. She had put in 11 applications in a week, and 2 of them called her back and asked her to come in, and she went, and both interviews were pleasant, and lasted 20 minutes, and ended with somebody saying they would be in touch by Friday, and neither of them was in touch by Friday. And when she called back the first one, the manager did not come to the phone, and when she called back the second one, a young woman said, in a voice that was trying to be kind, that the position had been filled internally. On the 10th day she stopped calling. It was not a decision. She simply put the phone down one afternoon and understood that there was no restaurant in the city of Chicago that was going to put her name on a schedule, and that nobody had said one word to her about why, and that this was how it was done. And then it reached Nadine. The first inspector came on a Tuesday, and stayed 2 hours, and wrote up the gasket on the reach in cooler and a hand sink that did not run hot enough. The second came 9 days later, a different man, and did the walk-in and the dry storage and the ceiling tiles over the line, and left a page and a half. The third came 6 days after that, on a Saturday, at the front of the dinner rush, and stood in the middle of Nadine Prosser's kitchen with a clipboard for 50 minutes, while the tickets backed up and the fryer went untended. And when he left, he told her that a fourth finding in the same quarter would put her before the board. Nadine did not say anything about it in front of Willa. She said it to the cook, in the alley, and Willa heard it through the screen door on the way to the dumpster. 3 in 2 weeks, Vinny. 3 in 26 years I have had 4. And Willa stood in the cold with a bag of trash in her hand and understood, completely, what she was looking at. Nobody had touched her. Nobody had raised a hand or a voice, or made a phone call she could ever prove existed. They had simply gone around her and found the 60-year-old woman who had given her a shift when the city would not. And they had begun, politely, patiently, with paperwork, to take that woman's life apart in front of her. She stopped taking the overnight after that. She told Nadine it was the certification, which was true, and Nadine looked at her for a second too long and said all right. And then the 8 days. She would think of them afterward as a single, long room she had walked through. She still came into Sully's, because Nadine let her sit at the end of the counter, and because the apartment was worse, and every night the corner booth stayed empty, and on the third night, she watched Nadine fill a glass of water from the tap, and carry it over to that booth, and set it down on the table in front of nobody, and stand there for a moment, and pick it up again, and pour it out. Nobody said anything about it. Toby got a 91 on a physics quiz, and taped it to the refrigerator. The radiator knocked. The salt got dirty in the gutters, and then it snowed again and covered it. She wrote him a message on the 4th night, 4 lines, and read it twice and deleted it. She wrote one on the 6th night that was 1 sentence long and deleted that too. On the 7th night, she wrote a third one that said only, "I found something in Milwaukee," and she looked at it a long time with her thumb over the send, and then she cleared the field and put the phone face down on the counter, and went home, and on the 8th day somebody knocked on her door. It was 8 below with the wind off the lake, and it was after 10 at night, and Rosalind Sartori was standing on the 3rd floor landing of a walk-up in Bridgeport, in a good wool coat, with snow melting in the fur of her collar, and both hands on the head of her cane. There was no car at the curb. There was no man in the stairwell. Willa's first reaction was not tenderness. It was fury, arriving so fast it startled her. And she took the old woman by the arm and pulled her through the door and shut it, and said, "Did you take a taxi?" And Rosalind said no, and Willa said, "What did you take?" And Rosalind said the bus. 2 of them. She had transferred at Halstead, and waited 11 minutes in the shelter, and a young man had given her his seat. Willa put her in the good chair by the radiator and took the wet coat off her and hung it on the door, and went and ran the tap until it steamed, and poured a mug of hot water and put it in her hands, and stood over her, and told her that she was 72 years old, that her heart was not good, that it was 8 below, that people her age go down on ice and never get up again, that she had a driver and a telephone, and a son who owned half the north side, and that if she wanted to see somebody she could have picked up either one of those things, instead of standing in a bus shelter at 31st Street in the dark. Rosalind let her finish. She held the mug in both hands and let every word of it land, and when Willa ran out, she said, "For 60 years, other people have decided where I should sit. My father, my husband, and now my son, who is the worst of them, because he does it out of love, and therefore cannot be argued with." She took a sip. "Tonight I decided. It was very cold, and it took a long time, and nobody knew where I was, and I have not been that happy in 11 years. Then she set the mug down on the table, and reached into the bag on her lap, and put a leather case on the kitchen table between them. It was old, cracked along the spine, the kind of case men carried when men still carried cases. "Sit down," Rosalind said. "I am going to say several things, and I would like to say all of them before you speak. My husband kept records. I have told you that. What I did not tell you, because I did not want to say it out loud, is that he kept 2 kinds. One kind is the jobs. The other kind is the men." She put her fingers on the case and did not open it. When a man on a site made trouble, when a man wrote something down or would not sign something or called the local, they wrote his name in a book, and the work stopped coming to him. Not all at once. It just stopped. And they kept the file, because they kept everything, because that is how men like my husband felt safe. She looked up. "There are 241 names in this case. Willa, yours is one of the families in it." Willa did not touch it. Rosalind said, "I found it in October, and I put it back, and I did not sleep well again. And I want you to hear the part I am most ashamed of, because you will not respect me otherwise. I knew. Not the details. I never had a detail in my hand in my life until this winter. But I knew what kind of house I lived in by 1985 at the latest, and I chose the coat, and the driver, and the good schools, and the quiet. And I told myself that a woman in my position had no power, and that was a lie. Because a woman who is in the room always has power. She simply has to be willing to lose the room. Her voice had not changed at all. I signed 40 years of silence. And then that ceiling came down on the one head in this city it had any business coming down on. Mine. Willa said, quietly, that she did not want to be told this so that she would forgive August. I am not asking you to forgive my son, Rosalind said. I am not here for him. He does not know I have this. Do you understand what I am telling you? What is in that case will put my son in a federal courtroom, and I carried it onto a bus and brought it to you anyway, because I have been a decoration for 60 years and I am not going to die as one. She pushed it across the table. This is not for him. It is for me. And Willa opened it. There were folders inside, upright, worn soft at the top edges, and on the inside face of the flap, where nothing was printed, somebody had written in ink, recently, in a hand she had seen on a coaster in a diner on Halsted, 2 words, not an apology, not an explanation, a name, written out in full, the way you write a name when you are giving it back to somebody. Owen Doyle. She sat down. The organization that had struck her father's name off a list 15 years ago had kept it in a case in a basement, and a man had gone down into that basement in the middle of a February and found it, and taken a pen, and written it out in his own hand where somebody would see it. And it was the first time in 15 years that Willa Doyle had seen her father's name written by a living person who was not her, and she put both hands flat on the table on either side of the case, and she cried the way people cry when a thing has been held for a very long time. She came to the house on Astor Street in the morning with the case under her arm, and she did not let herself sit down. He stood up when she came into the cedar room, and she could see him deciding what to say about the 8 days, and she did not give him the room to say it. The man who came out of here with his hand in a cast, she said. I want to know what happened to him, and I want you to tell me in plain words, and if you round any of it off, I am going to walk out of this house and you will not see me again. August Sartori put his hands in his pockets. He did not sit either. His name is Gordon Pike, he said, and I had him brought here, and I asked him who told him to bury your report. He said nobody. He said it 3 times. And a man named Frank Devlin, who has worked for this family since before I could drive, put Pike's hand flat on that table and broke 2 of the bones in it, and then Pike told me the truth. Willa did not move. Did you tell him to do it? No. Did you tell him not to? No. Were you in the room? I was standing where you are standing. She waited. You want to know if I stopped it, he said. I did not. It took 4 seconds and I did nothing for all 4 of them. And I have been telling myself since that it happened faster than a decision. And that is a lie. It was a decision. I have made it perhaps 30 times in 11 years, and every one of those times it was easier than the time before, and this one was the easiest of all, because he had said a word to you in a doorway, and I had been carrying that word around since the night the roof came down. He said it evenly, without any adjustment in his voice at all, and that was somehow the worst of it. Say the rest, she said. There is no rest. That is the whole of it. A man came into my house and left it with a broken hand because he was rude to a woman I have no claim on, and I watched. And Frank Devlin, she said. Where is he this morning? Downstairs, probably. He has worked here 26 years, so nothing happened to him. Nothing happened to him. Willa set the leather case down on the cedar, carefully, because it was not hers. I want to say something and I need you to not help me say it, she said. I have thought about you every day for 2 weeks, and I want to be very clear about what I am doing here, because I have watched what happens to people who are not clear around you. I am not here to tell you that you are a good man. He said nothing. You are not a good man, she said. You are the head of an organization that sold a stamp on a building, and my father wrote 4 lines about the iron in that building 15 years ago, and your godfather signed the bottom of the page. And what happened to my father after that was not an accident. It was arithmetic, and the arithmetic was yours. It was already yours before you were born, but you kept it. You signed for it. You told me so through that door yourself. Yes, he said. So no. I do not forgive you. I do not think I get to. And I do not think you should be given it by me, because I am the only person in this story who came out of it with a coat on my shoulders and a debt paid off. And if I hand you absolution now, it costs me nothing, and it costs you nothing, and my father is still on a list in a basement. She put one hand on the case. Here is what is actually true. I heard what you said in this room when you did not know I was in the hall. I have been in a lot of rooms with a lot of men, and I have never once heard one of them say the thing you said. And I do not know if you are becoming somebody else, or if that was one good minute in a bad life, and neither do you. She looked at him. I am not staying because I have forgiven you. I am staying because there are 241 names in this case, and I cannot do a thing with any of them from the outside. And because a stamped certificate beats a photograph every day of the week, I need what is in this house. That is why I am here. If you want me to lie about it and call it something warmer, find somebody else. He was quiet for a while after that, standing at the end of the table with his hand resting on the back of a chair, and then he went to the sideboard and unlocked the lower cabinet and took out a document box and set it down on the cedar in front of her, and opened it, and turned it so the contents faced her way. Then take what you came for, he said. It was not what she had expected. She had expected the 241 names, another list, another basement. What was in the box was the other half of the arithmetic. Bid comparisons on 11 jobs going back 9 years, with the certifying firm circled in pencil on each one. Wire transfers from Sartori Holdings into an account controlled by Lakeview Structural Assessment Group. A memorandum on the letterhead of the construction company recommending the substitution of a fastening system on a restoration job on Clark Street, initialed in the corner by Desmond J. Kerrigan, and, underneath, in a hand she had watched draw on a paper coaster in a diner, initialed again. A.S. She looked up. That is my signature, he said. It is on 4 of those. I want you to see it before you touch anything else in the box, because it is the reason for everything I am about to ask you. She said nothing. I have been up 3 nights with a lawyer in Milwaukee who does not know my name, he said. Here is what he told me, and I am going to repeat it to you exactly. If I walk into the federal building on Dearborn and put this on a table, I am a defendant making a proffer. Every word I say is the word of a man inside the thing, trading information for his own skin, and the first thing any competent defense attorney does with it is stand up and tell a jury that I bought my way out by inventing a story about a dead ironworker, and half of them will believe it, because it is exactly the kind of thing men like me do. He put one finger on the edge of the box. But you filed a complaint with the City Bureau of Building Inspection 9 days before that roof opened. You did it on a public terminal. It has a case number and a date stamp on it, and it was closed by a clerk who never met you, and it sat in that file doing nothing at all until the night the glass came down, and it is the only document in the state of Illinois that nobody in this family could have touched. He said it slowly. There is not a lawyer alive who can make that look like a bargain. You did not know me. You had never seen my face. You wrote it down when there was nothing in it for you and a great deal against you. And then you went back and worked the shift. Willa stood with her hands on the table. You are saying I have to be the one. I am saying you are the only one, he said. Not the best one. The only one on the earth. My word buys nothing. Your word cannot be bought. And the reason it cannot be bought is the worst night of your life. And I am aware of what I am asking. He stopped, and she watched something happen to him that she had not seen before, which was a man arriving at the edge of a sentence he had no practice at. I have never had to do this, he said. I want you to know that I know it. My whole life I have had 2 ways to get a thing out of a person. I have paid for it, or I have let a room understand what would happen if I did not get it. I did the first one to you with a check in a car, and you handed it back. And I did it again with a hospital, and you told me I had taken the only thing you owned. And you were right, and I cannot undo it, and it is going to sit between us for as long as we both live. He took his hand off the box. You are the only person I have ever met that I have to ask. So I am asking, please. She did not answer him right away. There was a linen napkin folded on the sideboard where a tray had been left, and she picked it up without thinking about it at all, the way her hands had picked up 10,000 of them, and she turned the hem under, and squared the corners, and creased it once with the side of her thumb, and set it down on the cedar in front of him, precisely, the way she had set them down every night for 10 years in a room where nobody had ever once said her name. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he came around the table and stopped a foot away and said, "May I?" And she did not say yes, and she did not say no. And he took her left hand and turned the wrist, and pushed the cuff of her sleeve back over the seam of the scar that ran from below her elbow toward the wrist. And he bent his head and put his mouth against it, once, and let her go. He did not touch her face. He did not say anything about love, or the future, or marriage. And she understood, standing there, that he was not going to, and that he had thought about it, and decided he had not earned the right to hand her a question that large. What he said, when he straightened up, was, "Stay for dinner. That is all I am asking for tonight. My mother is downstairs pretending she cannot hear us, and there is a roast that is going to be ruined, and I would like you to sit at that table and eat, and then I will drive you home myself." He was waiting outside Sully's on a Tuesday evening, in a parka that did not fit him, standing back from the window where the light did not reach, and when she came out he said her name, and she did not recognize the voice at first, because she had never once heard Gordon Pike say it. He had lost weight. The cast was still on his right hand, dirty gray now along the thumb, and he kept the whole arm tucked against his stomach the way people do when they have stopped noticing they are doing it. She held the door and told him to come in out of the wind. He came as far as the vestibule and stopped there. She pointed at the counter, and he looked at the stools and shook his head, and he stayed standing in 6 feet of tiled entryway for the whole of it, with his back near the door, and he never took his left hand out of his pocket. "I am not here to apologize to you," he said. "I want that said first. I have thought about how to do this the whole way over on the train, and every version where I apologize sounds like I am asking you for something." "All right," she said. "I got let go," he said. "Not fired. They call it a mutual separation. There is a payment involved, and there is a paper I signed, and my lawyer, who is my brother-in-law and does real estate closings, told me that the paper is probably not worth anything, and that is when I understood what my situation is." He glanced at the window. "I am 46 years old, and I have a daughter starting at a state school in the fall, and nobody in the restaurant business in this city will return my calls, and I have been sitting in my apartment for 3 weeks doing arithmetic. And the arithmetic is that as long as I am the only person alive who knows the thing I know, and nobody knows that I know it, I am a loose end. That is what I am. So I decided I would rather be a witness than a loose end, and a witness has to have somebody he told." He was breathing too fast for a man standing still. "So I am telling you." Willa did not move toward him. "You were told to bury what I wrote." "I was told," he said, "and I want to be exact, because exact is the only thing I have left. I was not told to bury it. Nobody ever says a sentence like that. I got a phone call on a Thursday afternoon, and the person on the other end was very pleasant, and asked me whether the shift logs were something the assessment people would want to look at, and said that it would be a shame if a note from an employee about the ceiling got into a file and turned into a closure order, because a closure order in February is 30 days minimum, and did I know what that would do to the calendar? And then the person said, and I remember this word for word, that it would be a shame to lose the whole season over one girl who is upset about dust, and I said I would take care of it. That is the whole call. It lasted under 2 minutes, and nobody said anything that anybody could put on an indictment." "Kerrigan," Willa said. Pike shook his head. She saw him do it and did not understand it for a second. "It was not Kerrigan," he said. "I have never once spoken to Desmond Kerrigan in my life." The call came from Sabine Marchetti. The vestibule went very quiet. Somewhere behind her, a ticket printer chattered. "Her gallery had the contract," Pike said. "All of it. The staging, the installations in the front hall, the pieces on loan for the auction, the whole look of that gala. And it was a 2-year deal with the foundation, and she had put her own money into the pieces. If that hall got closed for an assessment, the event moves or it does not happen, the loans go back, and she is a woman who has told a family what she can do standing in front of a family that has known her since she was a child." He shifted his weight. "I do not think she thought about a ceiling for 1 second. I want to say that because it is true, and because it is the part that keeps me up. I do not think she believed there was anything up there at all. I think she heard the word dust, and heard the word waitress, and did the sums the way anybody in this town does the sums, and made a call in a nice voice, and hung up, and went to lunch." He looked at Willa for the first time properly. "And I did it," he said. "She made the call. I am the one who did it. I want that on the record too, whoever ends up keeping the record." Then he opened the door behind him and went out into the cold without waiting to be told anything. and Willa stood in the vestibule and watched a frightened man cross Halsted with his arm held against his stomach, and could not find anywhere in herself the thing she had spent 5 years assuming she would feel. Nadine had turned the sign and was counting the drawer, and Willa was wiping down the pass when the bell went. And Desmond Kerrigan came in stamping snow off his shoes like a man arriving at a friend's house. "Do not get up," he said pleasantly, to nobody, and sat himself at the counter and folded his gloves and laid them beside him. Nadine's hand stopped over the register. "Ma'am," he said, "would you give us a couple of minutes?" Willa said it was all right, and Nadine went back through the swinging door and did not go far. Kerrigan looked around the room with real affection. "I ate in a place like this every day for 11 years, he said. "My first job was at a lunch counter on Ashland. People forget that about me." Then he took an envelope out of his coat and set it on the stainless and pushed it across with 2 fingers. The exact gesture another man had used in the back of a car in February, and Willa understood suddenly that it was not a family habit, it was a trade. "I want you to hear me say the kind thing first," he said. "You are a young woman with a brother and no cushion, and you have had a hard winter, and none of what is in that envelope has any conditions on it that I would be embarrassed to say out loud. There is enough in there to get you out of this weather and into a program somewhere warm and finish what you started at that school. I am not asking you for a signature. I am asking you to be somewhere else for about 11 months. She did not touch it. "You are here because of the photographs," she said. Kerrigan looked genuinely puzzled for a second, and then he laughed. One soft note, and it was the most frightening sound she had heard in her life. "The photographs," he said. "Sweetheart, I am not here about you at all." He turned the envelope a quarter turn on the counter, squaring it. "Rosalind Sartori walked into the federal building on Dearborn Street this morning, by herself, on a bus, apparently, which is a detail I am still trying to make peace with. She was in with 2 assistant United States attorneys and a woman from the Labor Department for 4.5 hours, and she did not have a lawyer with her, and she brought a case with her, and she did not bring it back out." He said it evenly. "You are a witness to a ceiling. She is a witness to 40 years. She sat at the table while my partner and I did every piece of business either of us ever did, and we talked in front of her the way you talk in front of a lamp, and now the lamp has a memory and a grudge, and about 9 months to live, and there is not one thing in the world I can offer her, because she does not want anything." He looked up. "You are the only person she listens to. You are going to call her tonight, and you are going to tell her that she has made a mistake, and that she is going to withdraw it in the morning." "No," Willa said. Kerrigan's face did not change, and something behind it did, and she watched the pleasantness go out of him the way heat goes out of a room. And he said, quietly, "Think about that," and reached inside his coat, and that was when the back door came off the latch. It banged against the mop sink hard enough to bring a shelf of tins down. Somebody's shoulder was in the frame, and then all of him was through it, and a chair went over, and glass came off the end of the counter and went under a heel, and August Sartori crossed that kitchen and came through the pass door at a speed she would not have believed, and there was one short, violent movement in the narrow space behind the counter, and then the 2 of them were braced against the steel, and the pistol was lying on the stainless between them, where it had come out of Kerrigan's hand and skated, spinning slowly, coming to rest against the sugar caddies. Nobody was touching it. Both men had both hands on each other. Willa did not think about it, and she did not shout. She stepped in, took it by the barrel with 2 fingers the way you pick up a knife off a floor, lifted the lid of the ice well beside the soda gun, and dropped it in, and closed the lid, and put the scoop on top of the lid. It made a small sound, like a bottle going in. Then she stepped back, and when she looked up, August had Kerrigan pinned against the steel with a forearm, and his other hand had closed on the front of the older man's coat, and everything in his face had gone somewhere she had not seen it go before, and she saw the whole of it happen. The grip tightening, the shoulder loading, 26 years of a house on Astor Street, arriving all at once in one man's arm. Kerrigan did not struggle. He looked back at him with a terrible calm and said, "Go on, Augie." Nothing moved for 3 or 4 seconds. And then August Sartori let go of his coat. He straightened up. He took a step back, and then another, until he was against the far side of the narrow aisle, and he stood there breathing with his hands open at his sides, and he said, "No." He took out his phone. Willa watched him find a number that he had clearly put in it days ago and had not called, and he put the phone to his ear, and when the line picked up he said, "This is August Sartori. I am at a diner at Halstead and 26th. I am going to wait here with the man who was holding a firearm in a room with 2 women 11 minutes ago, and I am not going to touch him. And I would like you to send somebody, and then I would like to come in tomorrow morning with my attorney and start telling you the rest of it. The foundation held its spring dinner anyway, because 11 tables had been paid for, and because the family had decided that not appearing would be its own kind of statement, and Sabine Marchetti was at the second table with her back very straight, and when Willa came in the room noticed. Willa did not go to her. She waited until the plates had gone around, and the noise had settled into that particular hum, and then she stood up at her own table and said Sabine's name once, at a normal volume, and the hum thinned out and went away. In November, Willa said, "You stood with me by a coat check and you put your hand on my arm and you told me that gratitude is a living thing and has a lifespan, and that its lifespan is exactly as long as Rosalind's. You told me not to make him choose, because he would choose beautifully, and I would be humiliated anyway, 400 small times a year. And you finished by saying that you were only telling me because you cared what happened to me, and that nobody else in the room would." She let it sit. Nobody moved. "I thought about that for a long time," she said, "because I could not answer you, and I have never once been unable to answer anybody. And then I found out what you did on a Thursday afternoon in February." She did not raise her voice at all. "You called Gordon Pike. You asked him whether the shift logs were something the assessment people would want to see. You told him it would be a shame to lose a season over one girl who was upset about dust. And a report about the ironwork over that hall went into a drawer. And 9 days later, a 100-year-old dome came down on 300 people." She looked at her. "I am not saying you wanted that. I do not think you believed there was anything up there. That is not the part that matters. The part that matters is that somebody wrote down a danger, and you decided that a contract was heavier than the piece of paper, and you made the call in a very nice voice, and then you went to lunch." The room was entirely silent. "There is a name for that," Willa said. "It is not rudeness, and it is not bad judgment, and it is not a misunderstanding between 2 women. It is obstruction. And I have already given your name and the substance of that call to the United States Attorney's Office, along with the man who took it." She picked up her napkin from the table, folded it once, and set it down. "You said nobody in this room would care what happened to me. You were right. That is why I stopped waiting for anybody in this room." At the head table, Rosalind Sartori laid her fork down on the cloth and brought her hands together, once, and the sound of it went all the way to the back wall. It took 14 months, and it was done in rooms with bad carpet. August Sartori pleaded guilty in the federal courthouse on Dearborn Street to 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud in connection with payments made from Sartori Holdings to a certifying firm between 2016 and the present, and he did not enter into any agreement that reduced the count, and he did not ask for the plea to be taken under seal. He turned over the books, all of them, the bid comparisons and the transfers and the memoranda, including the 4 documents that carried his own initials, and he sat for 11 interviews with 2 assistant United States attorneys and a woman from the Labor Department, and answered what he was asked. Desmond Kerrigan was indicted on 9 counts and was convicted at trial on 7 of them, and the record of a safety condition report filed 15 years earlier and disposed of with 4 words in blue ink was entered into evidence on the 3rd day. The room in Indiana was surrendered under a consent decree, and the license was not renewed. Both locals went into federal monitorship, and the pension boards were reconstituted with trustees, and the family did not name. 2 of the 3 companies were dissolved, and their assets sold, and the house on Astor Street was sold. And the proceeds of the sale went, in part, into a fund administered by the court for the 311 people who had been in that hall. He was sentenced to 33 months. He served 26 of them at a facility in Pennsylvania and was released on supervision, and the terms of his supervision prohibit him from holding any position with a labor organization for the rest of his life. What was left when it was finished was the construction company, and he kept it, and he changed what it does. It no longer bids on new work. It takes contracts on old buildings, the ones put up in this city between 1890 and 1930, and it does one thing to them, which is to open up their ceilings and their cornices and their anchorages and put back the iron that 100 years has finished with. Every job is inspected by a firm the company has no interest in. Every report is filed as public record. The first building it did was on Clark Street. The new dome went in on a Thursday in September, and it is not a copy of the old one. The ribs are steel, and the seats are visible from the floor, because nothing in that building is hidden anymore, and the glass is laminated and set in panels. And along the lower edge of the 11 panels that face south, a fabricator in Rockford cut 22 names into the surface, at a depth of about 1/16 of an inch. They are the names on the Raising Gang sheets from 1924. The men who put the original iron up over what was then a bank floor. And the last name on the 11th panel is Owen Doyle, because he went up under that dome 3 generations later to work on it. And because a woman on a bus in 8 below zero weather carried a leather case across this city so that his name would exist somewhere other than a list. Around noon, when the sun comes over the building to the south, the letters throw their shadows down onto the stone, and the names lie there across the floor for about 40 minutes, backwards and enormous, and you cannot read them from a chair. You have to get up, and you have to walk out into the middle of the floor, and you have to look down. That was Willa's idea, and she had to argue for it. She was on the lift that Thursday with a hard hat on and a torque wrench in her hand, checking the seating on the Western Anchor herself, because she is in her 2nd year now at the same state school on the west side, and because there is not a person alive who could have talked her out of putting her own hands on that particular piece of iron. August stood at the base of the lift, with one hand on the outrigger leg, steadying it, looking up, saying nothing, which is what he does now, a man who spent his whole life making rooms move around him, holding the foot of a ladder for somebody else. Toby was there because he had finished ground school in August, and had come to tell his sister that the written exam is nothing, absolutely nothing, and to explain to everybody within earshot how a pressurized cabin is really just a very slow, very polite structural problem. And Rosalind sat in the middle of it all in a chair somebody had carried out for her with a blanket over her knees, directing the entire operation, telling 2 grown men where to stand, and telling her son that he was in the light. Here is the thing worth carrying out of this story. It did not take a monster to bring a roof down on 300 people. It took a stamp that somebody sold, a telephone call made in a very pleasant voice, and 3 people who each said, in their own way, that it was not their job. And it took only one person to stop the next one, and she was the lowest paid adult in that room. Nobody is furniture. Not the woman refilling your water, not the old man sweeping the platform, not the mother nobody talks to at the table. Every one of them sees something, and the only question that ever matters is whether anyone in the room is willing to listen when they say it. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel, and leave a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it today, because there are new stories here every day. We would truly love to know how this one landed for you, so tell us in the comments what you felt, and whether there was ever a moment in your own life when you were the only one who spoke up, or the only one who listened. We read them, and they mean a great deal to us, wishing you good health, peace, and quiet joy in your days. Goodbye for now, and we will see you in the next video.